The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be here. My name is Mike Miles. This is our third week of podcasting from Studio 21. We are a Friends and Family podcast, and we're doing pretty well. This has been a real eye-opening experience, and we've gotten a lot of response from a lot of people that we didn't know prior, and this has been a kind of a godsend for some people. I just want to take a moment, and I want to thank Genesis House for sponsoring us. I'd also like to thank Studio 21, Mr. Jonathan, Dave Garofalo, for bringing us to the studio and giving us an opportunity and kind of prodding us along to put this out there for a good cause to help people that are struggling with addiction, not only themselves but their family members. Misconception is alcoholics, addicts, they feel like they're only hurting themselves. In reality, they're hurting the people that love them. Usually, it's a large amount as well. Mm-hmm. So, without further ado, I want to introduce Ed Chaccio to my right.
Hi, everybody. Dave, you want to? Jonathan, you want to? Yeah, well, you guys can find the podcast at any time on streamed live at 4:00 on Tuesdays on YouTube, and it also is available on Podbean. That's BEAN, Podbean, on the app. You can get it at iTunes, and you can find it on iHeartRadio. So if you have any of those, if you have an iPhone, you automatically have the iTunes podcast app. That's the purple button. You can subscribe there. You can subscribe on Podbean, downloading that app if you have an Android or a Google phone. And everybody can also get iHeartRadio, which is another way to subscribe to the show. And that's what we'd like. We'd like it if you press the subscribe button, you set it and forget it, and it'll automatically download to your phone, and you can listen to the show each and every week.
Thanks, Jonathan. Jonathan is the technical guy. We don't, us old guys don't know that stuff.
Yeah, we know nothing.
I want to give out our important 800 number, which we kind of sparsely give out, but we're going to try to give you guys out a lot more. It's 800-989-6504. That's to get a hold of one of us and talk to us if family members out there have anything that they want to talk about or kind of direction or whatever. So it's 800-989-6504. And my name is Ed Chaccio. I am Director of Marketing and Outreach for Genesis House, and this is our third show, and it's great. We're wonderful opportunity here to kind of get the message out. I was blessed almost 24 years ago to be in recovery and end up with two wonderful guys here to do a great show to get the word out. So.
Yeah, those guys couldn't make it till Mike and I showed up.
And I'd like to introduce my other partner, Jeff.
Thank you, Ed. So as Ed and Mike have said, we're doing this podcast. My name is Jeffrey Zeisel. I'm a clinical social worker. I have a practice in Woburn that does a lot of work with addictions. We do work with individuals. We run an early recovery group as well on Thursday nights. Tonight, Tuesday night, we actually do a support group for parents of children of opioid users. And, this whole show and our whole mission and our sort of collective persona is really about helping people. So, Mike is a very modest guy, but spent many, many years as a police officer helping people. And Mike also, while he was working in law enforcement, he actually returned back to school. Not an easy thing to do, raising a family, working full-time. Got his degree, went to graduate school, is a MSW, so he continues working with people. And as Ed has mentioned, he spends a lot of time, and us three work together trying to make the world a little better. We know that addiction is an illness, a disease. We are all about not judging people and understand that people have substance abuse disorders. And it's an illness like diabetes or heart disease or cancer. And it's really about what we can do to help. And hopefully this podcast educates people. We can all learn a little and sort of reach out to the larger community.
What strikes me as pretty unique and remarkable is I've seen both Ed and Mike give out their personal cell phones to somebody that was interested in having a conversation. And that speaks to the character of both of you, that you're willing to give up your own personal time because you've seen the benefits of recovery, and you're willing to share those benefits with people. So appreciate that, guys.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
We have a guest on the phone.
We do. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Jonathan, and Studio 21 for hosting us and really pushing us again to do this. Just a little change in plans here. We were supposed to have Kevin Dixon on from, God, where's he from? Cadius Consultants. But he was pulled out to an emergency intervention. They do intervention, so he's pulled out to emergency intervention. And so last minute, I call the guest that we have on the phone today, Dory Carolyn. She's from the Newtown Parent Connection. I've known Dory for, God, we were just talking 20 years or so. She's helped numerous parents. She has a very sad but moving story and the reason behind the Newtown Parent Connection. I think this show, guys, will go hand in hand with David from last week to Dory this week. I think, God works in strange ways, and Dory was gracious enough to come onto the show today last minute, and we have Dory Carolyn on the phone with us. Dory, you want to kind of give a little bit about your about Newtown Parent Connection and a quick
I will.
overall.
I'd like to thank you for allowing me the opportunity. And yes, I go back with both Ed and Stacy many, many years of when I first started Parent Connection, which was in 1993 when my son was in the throes of his addiction. And back then, nobody spoke about drugs, and you were behind closed doors because you didn't want people in the community knowing that your child was dabbling with drugs. So we used to meet at a real estate office once a month, and we decided to have an open forum and discuss drugs. And that was back in 93. And from that forum that we had, we got some changes in the schools. We had a substance abuse counselor. We had a security guard. And they really worked on the rules and the consequences if kids brought drugs into the school system. In 1999, my son Brian had passed away from a prescription drug overdose. And oddly enough, the psychiatrist was the one who had really given him the drugs to use to keep him at an even keel. And we all felt that you should not be, it's not any different than taking any other drug. He was taking something that was very similar to Valium. And he had a car accident, and we all know that when you are in recovery, it's very easy to have something to set you off, and that kind of set him off. And he started popping these pills, and unfortunately, he died from that. So several years later, in 2003, Newtown was going through a terrible crisis with young people overdosing and passing away. We had just about 13 deaths. And at the time, I was the executive director at the only gym in town. So I got to see all the kids that were coming in, and before they'd come into the gym, they'd get high outside and then come inside and work out. So Parent Connection kind of waned in 1995, and although there was some talk about the drugs, we weren't having regular meetings. So we decided that we would go to the Newtown newspaper and see if we could get some articles written about our children doing drugs. And unfortunately, at the time, we were told that someone has to back what you're saying. You either have to get the superintendent of schools, the chief of police, or the first selectman to back you. Nobody would come forward because people felt that the kids that were using drugs were from the families who really didn't pay attention to where their kids were and what they were doing. So I contacted all of the local treatment facilities in the area to get the numbers of how many people from Newtown, Danbury, and Brookfield were being admitted for drug use. When I went back with the statistics, the newspaper, which was the Newtown Bee, jumped on it and started allowing us to write articles and to do interviews. So from that, we had John Hamilton, who I think is a guru in the industry, come out and talk about the drug use and what was happening. So we had about 300 people attend the forum, and that was the start of the Newtown Parent Connection. We ended up becoming a 501c3, and since then we have weekly support meetings. On Wednesday night we're in Fairfield, and on Thursday night we're in Newtown. We run a bereavement group once a month, which sadly enough we get 3 or 4 new families coming every single month. We have a parent university that we're doing on March 24th. I believe this is probably our 5th one. And then I have a senior opioid forum that we're doing in May. And we have our gala that we're doing in April.
Now, Dory,
we are self-funded.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. No. We are self-funded.
No, go ahead, Dory.
Go ahead, Ed.
Now, all this information, we can find this on your website. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes,
good.
It's on the website.
Okay. What is that? What is that website for our listeners?
It's www.newtownparentconnection.org. I think the best thing that we do is our Hope and Support Group is so embracing. We have people that have been attending since started 14 years ago, and some their kids are in recovery, and some their kids are still in the throes of their addiction. But when anybody walks through that door, I know that they're going to walk out feeling a lot better than when they came in. And I think that's the hardest part, is getting into the room and feeling like you're safe and you're not alone, and no one's going to judge you when you're in there.
So, Dory, it sounds like that some of these families that come through your meetings may get some closure, get their son or daughter or loved one into treatment, and may not. It sounds like they're coming in and just being there for themselves and how they can cope with their loved one in treatment and not enable them, I guess. Is that part of your process of the group?
Absolutely. We know that we have no control over our loved one who's using, but we have to make a decision at some point, because all of our attention, because we're moms and dads, go to that child because we're trying to save that child or spouse, whatever the case may be. So we work with the families to learn to detach with love, because if we make changes, hopefully the person who's addicted is going to make changes. So it's a whole process of, you can see people who come in on week 1, and by week 4 or week 5, they seem to be taking baby steps to stop enabling, to stop giving money. Because if you have your loved one living with you in your home, and you're feeding them, and they have a roof over their head, they have clean clothes, you're giving them money for gas, why is anything going to change?
Dory,
so you need to change the world.
Dory, I'm listening to your story, and I worked as a cop on the streets for 28 years, and in the late 80s, early 90s, there was an awful heroin epidemic, and a lot of kids were dying, a lot of young girls, a lot of young men. In the city of Lowell, big city, a very diverse city, but people weren't rushing to help these individuals. They were considered, I think, to be like a minority group of people. They weren't everybody's sons and daughters. And you're a pioneer. You've been doing this for 20 years. I'm listening to you, and I think back in 1988, I used to drive the police wagon. It used to be called the paddy wagon, but now we're we're in a society that we're politically correct, so we don't say that any longer. But the police wagon was a job that, some nights I'd pick up 18 people, and a lot of them were prostitutes, and a lot of them were drug addicts that would get caught with drugs, and nobody really cared much for them. The police did, though, because we had to care for them. We had to take them. We had to make sure they were okay. We had to get them to court. We had to get them bailed out. We had to feed them. And sometimes clothe them, depending on their condition. But my point is, I had a young girl one time, and she was the valedictorian of her graduating class from a local high school. And 6 months later, she was a full-blown heroin addict, prostituting herself. And I remember asking her if I was in early recovery, and I asked her if she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. She had no idea what I was talking about. I told her there was a better way. A couple weeks later, I pick her up again, and voila, she's looking for help. Luckily, we had a judge at the time, Judge Neil Walker. We took her, instead of sending her to a women's prison, she went to a recovery hospital. And about a year later, I'm doing a detail, directing traffic, and this beautiful girl pulls up in a Volvo with a baby seat, and it's her. I have no idea who she is, and she got recovery. And that's one success story from 20-something years ago. And so when I'm listening to you, you're bringing all this back. So you've been doing this for an awfully long time. What do you see? Let me ask you this specific question. What do you see as a tool for success, if there is one?
Number one is education. I say now, if I knew then what I know now, my son would be beside me. When he was in treatment, it was a 30-day program, and then he came back home. We have found that with young people, obviously you can't do this with someone who's married with children, but if we have a young person, we send them down to Florida. We have had a lot of success at the Genesis House, which is one of the places that we use. And it's the continuum of care. You know, they do detox, they do their program, they do IOP, sober living. If they can stay away for minimum 6 months, somewhere around a year, which many of them end up not coming home, their chances of being clean and sober are great. And when we bring them back, we had a woman who was coming to our support group, and the therapist had referred her here. She came to maybe 2 or 3 meetings. Her daughter went down to Florida, and I guess she felt that she didn't need to come back to the meetings because her daughter was safe. I get a call from her right after Christmas that her daughter came home on the 22nd, and she overdosed and died on the 23rd. I can tell you that had she continued coming to group, we would never have allowed her to bring her home. We would have absolutely said that she needs to stay down there.
And just like the parents, Jeff, I think, and the addicts like Mike and myself, we need to keep going to meetings. Just because I have coming up on 24 years doesn't mean I can't stop going to meetings, talking to my sponsor, hanging out with Mike and Jeff. Do you see that as far as the statistics go, and,
yes,
and what works as far as that goes? Like Dory was saying.
It's a great point, Ed, and Dory, we're all on board with what you're saying, because we do know that essentially the longer you get treatment, the better the outcome statistics are. So when I see people in my office who are dealing with addictive disorders, I'll say to them, if you go to the gym and you work out once a month, you think you're going to get in shape, versus if you go to the gym 3 to 5 times a week, you think you'll be in better shape, and magnify that over 12 months. If you use the analogy, of course we know that they'll be in better shape, etc. The research around addiction says that it's a brain disorder. So we know that it takes time for the brain to heal. And just like a person gets a concussion, it takes time for the concussive symptoms to dissipate and for them to get better. And Dre, I like what you were saying is that the first thing is really education. And we know that getting families together to, number one, educate them, but also, just as importantly, support each other, because they may, in fact, know the right thing to do. They just are struggling because their kid isn't there yet. So it is, it's a conundrum, because sometimes, when you're dealing with an adult child in your family who has a disorder of addiction, what is the most frequently thing we hear that a parent says why they don't want to do tough love or put them out, etc. And actually, I don't really think of the term tough love. I think of just love and just doing the right thing. But the biggest fear is that I don't want my child to die in the street. That's why they don't do it. So I always say, well, do you want them to die in your bedroom, in their bedroom? Of course not. So we really have to educate them.
We've had 2 of those.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We've had 2 of those in the last 2 months.
Yeah.
So, we as parents are dysfunctional also. If we're not in a program in, either what Parent Connection does or an Al-Anon program, when that loved one comes back home, we're just as dysfunctional, because now we're walking on eggshells. We're concerned about where are they, what are they doing. You're checking their eyes, and that's no way to live.
Right.
Dory,
it's not fair to the siblings.
I used to call it my grandmother used to give me when I got into early recovery. My grandmother used to give me the sniff kiss. She would kiss me on the cheek, and I know why she was kissing me, to see if there was any alcohol in my breath. In early recovery.
I'm sure she loved you. What's not to love about Ed?
I know. Mike and myself have a child in recovery, and I think daily we have to kind of step back and let them do their own thing, fail, and succeed on their own. We can't take responsibility for their recovery, nor can we take responsibility for their use or their or their fails or relapses. I mean, is that something that you struggle with or practice every day besides your recovery, Mike?
Sure. And I think the communication, education, obviously is a tool, second to none. Genesis House, and I only say this because I've had many friends that have sent their children there. I've sent professionals there, loved ones there, and honestly, I know treatment facilities. I spent 30 days on one back in 1980, but I've had some great success because there's a follow-up. There's good therapists there. It's a good network. You can call anytime. You get somebody. There's never, ever a lull in communication with them. And as far as loved ones or people that you really care about, there's a saying in AA, and it's let go and let God. And this isn't a spiritual. I mean, this isn't a religious type of thing. God can be anything to anybody. God can be
this cup. Some people have a higher power as a cup when we come into the room.
Whatever you want.
I suppose it depends what's in the cup.
Yeah.
But it used to be my higher power.
I have a question for Dory. Dory, political posturing being what it is, and you had mentioned early on in the interview here that you were having an issue getting some of the political higher-ups to stand up for you. Has the attitude of these political higher-ups changed as a result of your program being as successful as it is?
It is amazing, and it all happened when we got a new superintendent in town who said, come in and do whatever you want to do. So last year in March, we brought, prior to March, we brought Chris Herron in, we did Mark Miro, we brought people in recovery in, but we brought the Stutman group in from John, I think his name, John Don. He worked for the DEA for 25 years, and Jody Switalski was a judge sitting on the bench, getting, basically putting people in jail. And she had a couple of deaths that really changed her life. So now she goes on the road and she does talks. So they came out, they went to the middle school, they went to the high school. We did a community forum. And the best part was that we managed to get into Danbury Hospital to educate the physicians during grand rounds. And it was so great that the hospital hired Jody to come back and do an all-day session.
Wow.
We are now working on bringing this group into every city that we can possibly do it in town as soon as we start raising the money to do it. So we're working in Stanford right now and in Danbury. And we hope that by October we will be in 2 additional towns. But what has happened is when this whole opioid crisis took place, people were asking us to, can you come and talk to these people? Can you come and talk to those people? So we're doing senior forums. The Newtown and the Monroe police use us whenever they can, either dispersing our cards or calling to see if we can give help. We have been working with the seniors in town. We did a forum last year, and we're working on one for May 4th. And it's just great. The Senator Long, is wonderful. He took me to meet senators about 3 weeks ago. He said, you need to get out. You need to meet these people. You need to tell your story. So the support is just amazing. Yeah. Today I got a call from one of the pastors asking if we could come down and talk and see how we could work together, collaborating to help people in the community. So it's really, it's like dominoes. It's like taking a hold of my life. What I thought I'd be working 25 hours a week, I'm probably doing 50 or 60 hours a week. Yeah.
And
but it's all good stuff.
To piggyback on what Mike was saying, Dory, years and years ago, Mike, Mike's a kind, giving soul, but years and years ago, I know when I went to school, I was known as a dirtbag. You know what I mean? I smoked pot, I did cocaine, I drank in the back of the school. And we were kind of that outcast, those outcasts. And to start this program 20 years ago, this was unheard of, anything like this. Recoveries, it's out there. You see commercials on TV for everybody's talking about it. But that 20 years ago, it was nothing to talk about. It was you were supposed to sweep that under the carpet. You know what I mean?
Well, you go back 30 years when I was in grade school, and we were told as part of the Just Say No to Drugs campaign that druggies were bad, and you were to ostracize them and keep them away from you for fear that you'd end up falling victim to the drugs themselves.
It is pretty interesting to follow sort of the cultural mores of society. We go through periods of time where certain things are taboo and they're bad people. As you pointed out, Ed, when you were using in high school, you were labeled as the bad kid. And it's interesting because at the turn of the century, in 1914, we had the Harrison Act. That was a federal legislation that was passed that actually made drugs illegal. Up until that point, the people who were using opioids and opiates and other drugs, they were not breaking the law. When the Harrison Act passed in 1914, if you were the minister's wife and had an opium problem, prior to the law, you were fine. After the law, you were breaking the law, you went to jail. Now you were a drug addict. Yeah. And the term, we throw the word addict around a lot. It is somewhat pejorative. We actually try to say now people with substance abuse disorders, but it really is the same person. However, we don't want people to be so stigmatized. But we do see over time, fortunately, we are much more sensitive and aware about what has happened. And I actually think what really turned the tide was that the pharmaceutical companies produced so many opioids that was the white middle class kids and the upper class kids who were dying. It was no longer a problem in the ghetto. It was no longer a problem for the black population, because those folks have been oppressed and been dying and no one paid attention to them. Now, when our kids are dying, now it makes the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal.
So true. And just something the last few years I've noticed that people that lose loved ones. I've had 5 close friends in law enforcement. 5 close friends, law enforcement friends, that have lost their sons to overdose. And one of my friends, he and his family decided to put in the obituary, how their son succumbed, And this is a very prominent family. And, when I read that, it brought tears to my eyes, because I knew how hard that had to be. First of all, he just lost his number one son, his oldest son, who he was very close to. And secondly, he wanted to help other people. And popularity and prominence, damn it, he just went ahead and did this. And I saw that, and I knew then that we're turning the corner. I've seen the stats. I follow the stats frequently in Massachusetts. Opiate addiction, and not addiction, but death by opioid, has declined considerably. Not where we want it, but it's on the way down, which people beware. I'm saying this doesn't mean things are getting better, overnight, but there is something going on. There's something afoot that's causing people to at least understand that there is death here. And I really have to applaud you again to be doing this for as long as you have. I had no idea you were doing it this long. You're a pioneer, and God bless you.
Now, Dory, is there a quick question? Is there now, I know we're talking regional and you're talking Connecticut, Danbury, Newtown area, but parent groups, are there parent groups across the United States, or do we have to come to you to get to this parent group? What about in New Jersey or California? Because this podcast goes out to all over the place, so I just don't want people thinking that it's regional, that you don't have to get anywhere. Okay, so they can probably just Google it.
There isn't a parent connection everywhere, but I'm working with a family. I'm working with someone who the son lives in Arizona, the parents live in Chicago, and the guy that I'm working with is in Atlanta. And the referral came from someone who had been to a parent connection group. Wow. It all can be done over the phone.
Good.
But there's Al-Anons everywhere, so they can go to an Al-Anon group somewhere.
As we're getting close to wrapping up, how are you said earlier you're self-funded. How is it that you're able to raise funds, if you don't mind talking about it?
I go out and beg. When we start depleting our funds, we were lucky enough to get a $500,000 grant from the state of Connecticut to retrofit one of the buildings at Fairfield Hills. We have this beautiful building. The town gives us the building for $1. So basically, it's just the cost of running the building. So we have a gala on April 7th, which I think you're coming to it. I don't know if you know that yet.
Oh, okay. I'm there, I guess.
That's our fundraiser. And then we have a golf tournament, which we do in October. And basically, people either give through their work and or they send donations to us. But everything that's done we're basically a volunteer group. I get a very small salary just to, I'm retired. So it's just to take care of whatever I'm doing. And it's all good. And one thing that I just want to say, parents have to remember that their child lives with guilt and shame, just as we do. And when we, as parents, don't acknowledge our children that our child has a substance abuse disorder, what message are we saying to them? And I think that's what Parent Connection does. It embraces and supports parents as we move forward, taking care of ourselves, which is what we have to do, but helping them to get past the guilt and shame that so many suffer from. And it's not just seeing that drugs sap away the life of our loved ones, but at the same time, we're still grappling with the stigma and ignorance of addiction among our friends, families, and whoever else is out there. And that's the part that we have to give up. This is our child, and it doesn't matter what Mary next door thinks of my kid. I'm going to do everything I can to save his life.
Good for you.
Well spoken.
Yep. Dory, I often say to folks, your opinion of me is none of my business. So,
right.
So the website again is newtownparentconnection.org. Could someone make a donation through the website, or is there another way to do it?
Yes. There's a donate button on the website.
Yeah, a good cause to donate to, and it's Dory helped. I've seen throughout the years how Dory helped out a ton of people, and just listen, some of the stories that she had, and my wife works very closely with Dory, and knowing some of the things that the Newtown Parent Connection does, it's definitely a good cause to kind of make a donation to. So,
Dory, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank
Dory.
you.
And keep doing what you're doing. And I believe my cell phone is on the website also, because you're calling me on my cell phone. But they can call me 24/7, 7 days a week.
Great.
Well, you're a giver, that's for sure. And I want to thank Studio 21 as well as Genesis House. And one more time, the 1-800 number is 1-800-989-6504. And we'll see you next week, Tuesday the 27th.
Mike, would you tell everybody who our guest is next week?
Next week, our guest will be Chief William Taylor, Lowell Police Chief. William Taylor has years of experience as a narcotics officer, helped clean up the city of Lowell. He's been the chief of police for several years, and he's got a great story to talk about and all the work he's done. And I'm looking forward to having him on the show.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dory. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Dory.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.